Hello, Melinda. How are you doing today?
I'm good. And you, Dean?
Very well. Dean Boles here from Ontario. We've been able to provide some valuable resources and digital experiences over this past 50 days, I believe it is. And I'm very pleased to have Melinda Harrison, Olympian author and coach, along with us, who's just launched her new book called Personal Next. And Melinda has been helping us with some a weekly series of tools, insight, research to both help coaches, athletes, and whoever else is tuning in. As I was thinking today, this is our seventh series or seventh delivery. And I think each one can fit together in a sequence, or each one can be taken by themselves, and you get so much value out of it and some tools that are actually quite valuable. So welcome, Melinda. Thanks for being with us today.
Happy to be here. I hope everybody's doing okay out there. Constantly thinking of my swimmers and the coaches. You know, I've connected with some of the swimmers over the last week who have gone out and bought the book. And it's just such a joy to talk to them and hear their spirit. And, I'm cheering each one of you on.
This is fantastic. Well, today's topic is around strategies for coping with worries and thoughts. And I think, this probably can go along for any stage that we're in this 50-day period. And I would suggest that it will help us get through the next 50 days, if not longer.
Right. I mean, anybody that knows me knows that, while I'm a very positive person, I'm always, I don't hide from the truth. And so, as we know, the truth is hard right now. And so, but we don't know what the truth will be tomorrow. And so every day we have to prepare that things will shift and we'll get more back to normal. It won't get to normal, but it'll get more back. So, I designed this week, again, to scaffold on everything else we've talked about, but really to move that responsive choice back to the control and eliminate some of those negative thoughts that we might be having.
Exactly. I think this is going to be a wonderful experience here.
Great. Okay. Another, just an aside, I was reading a really interesting article on National Geographic this weekend on Zoom gloom. And we have to step back, and while it's wonderful that we have this platform, and 10, 12 years ago, we wouldn't have had the ability to connect like we are today, but also realizing that on any online platform, we're getting an audio and a visual, but there are limitations to that. You miss all the nuances of face-to-face communication. And so we have to recognize what those nuances and those things we're missing and try and figure out how we can connect on different levels other than just audio and visual.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so this week we're going to talk about strategies for coping with worries and thoughts. As you said, we're 50 days into this. And so, day 10, we wouldn't have necessarily thought we'd be 50 days into this. And so obviously things pop up. And what we want to do is take a step back and practice responsive choices, which scaffolds onto last week.
There we go. Okay.
So, I always like to point out the iceberg model. And the iceberg model is used for a lot of different verticals. But I think what's important here is that we have an image that we portray to the world. And as an athlete, that image is strong and that we can handle things, and that, people aren't necessarily going to see what's underneath that image. And so underneath that strong, tough person that is out there competing are thoughts, beliefs, core values, mindsets, emotions, biases, and your personality. And sometimes those things float above the surface. We've talked about our core values and our mindset and being vulnerable enough to share our emotions and our thoughts. But most of the time, because we're afraid to be vulnerable, those things float below the surface.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's a great illustration. It absolutely is, and we've seen it in different contexts and descriptions on various things. But when you have a visual, I think that's one thing I really like about what you've been able to present to us is the visual, because as we know, the words are there and they strike a chord with each of us in maybe different ways, but we can create a lot more words or thoughts through these visuals that you provide.
Well, that goes back to that Zoom gloom, right? Is that,
Mm-hmm.
if it's just you and I talking all the time, then people aren't necessarily thinking, I wonder how that iceberg relates to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, I know it relates to me. There's lots of things that I've said this over and over in the calls that, I'm not a person that asks for help very much. I've learned to be independent, and,
Yeah.
I trust a few people, but I don't trust widely. And so that's below the surface. When people meet
Yeah.
me, they would never know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's important that I learn to expand that trust and that learning to ask for help. And that goes
Uh,
right back to my athlete days.
yeah. Yeah. And I think in this particular moment now, there's a bit of discussion. Obviously, we're reading it in the news that the various provinces and municipalities, or the country itself, is talking about returning to some sort of business, opening up business a little bit, opening up things. And with that, obviously, is the interest of when we're going to get in the pool and how we're going to get back to actual swimming and things like that. And we all have to understand that things are going to open up at a different rate. They're going to, and some people might get a bit of a jump start in some ways. But we can't let our emotions or anxieties creep in. We have to understand when our time comes, it will be fine, and we will have to go with that. And I think that's possibly some of the things that we may be faced with in the coming weeks and months.
Right. Right. And this iceberg model is really great to talk about that. You look out and you see other athletes that might be able to do things that you're
Mhm.
not able to do just because you don't have the means, or your province isn't open yet, or, for a variety of other reasons. And so, deep down inside, underneath the surface, you're steaming because you can't be doing what someone else is doing.
Mhm.
So we have to learn to figure out what part of this can we control, and then from that, also what part can't we control, and how is that negative thought hurting me right now in this moment.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know I've talked about this, but I just keep reinforcing it, that the brain looks for, learns from, and holds on to anything that's associated with danger, failure, loss of, or not being part of, or not being included in a group. It's just the natural evolutionary response to survival. We perceive threats first. And of course, our ancestors, those that lived on the savannah and had the threat of the saber-toothed tiger, they had to perceive these threats, because if they didn't, they'd be
Mhm.
dead. And so this conditioning carries over to today. The threat is no longer that saber-toothed tiger, but it does not mean that fear, loss, failure, exclusion are not subconsciously top of mind as we scan our worlds.
Mhm.
And this world includes our physical world and our emotional world. And that's kind of what I was getting at back 2 sessions ago when I talked about all the influences that affect us, that are coming at us daily, and how we end up choosing what influences to engage in, both positively and negatively. I'm adding one more piece of thought to this slide here. And it really is thinking about how many thoughts do we have in a 24-hour period? Any idea? Did you go look this up?
No, I didn't look it up. I was going, darn, I should take time to look it up, and I didn't. I thought, no, I'm just going to be as surprised as I should be. I can just think, oh my gosh, it must. I'm sure it's incredible. It's got to be over 100. I can just imagine uh, in my own little mind, it's at least 100, if not more.
100, like 100?
Yeah, say I'm 100.
Okay, you're way off. So there's controversy in this. But even in the lowest of controversies, it's 10,000.
There you go. I'm glad I glad I waited to find out that number, because that's shocking. That is
And that's
amazing.
the lowest. The average, they believe, is 50,000 thoughts.
Oh my gosh. I hope I'm a bit more than 100. I hope.
Well, because what you did, Dean, is you went to your conscious thoughts.
Yeah, true.
So think about when you got up this morning. You probably thought, what's the weather out? Okay, what do I have to do? Okay, can I sleep for 5 more minutes? And hundreds of things float through your head in that first 5 minutes of the day.
Yeah. And it's probably it's probably the thoughts not moving forward in the day. It's the thoughts from yesterday and last week and so on and so forth. Okay, I see that number creeping up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's incredible. And so, I think what we have to realize is that thoughts zoom around our head. There's another study, and again, these are studies, and I'm not a psychologist, as I keep telling people, but these are studies that say that 70% of our thoughts are negative. Or maybe not as much negative as they have to deal with fear, loss, failure, exclusion. And because of that, and that's just the conditioning that we've had. So we have to be aware that it's natural to have negative thoughts. And then what do we do about those negative thoughts?
Yeah, that's the critical piece to it. Yes.
Yeah. So not all negative thoughts are bad. And as an athlete, every athlete would know this, because that's what can push you up that hill. Right? Yeah. When you think, I can't do this, and somebody says, yes, you can, what do? You dig deeper.
Yeah.
In my book, I talk about a set that Stu Isaac, my coach at Michigan, gave me, where he wanted me to do 5 200 backs, long course on, no, I think it was short course, on 2:15. And I think at the time, my best time was around 2 minutes. And I'm looking at him saying, you're an idiot, Stu. I'm not doing that. And he said, yes, you are doing it. And with no choice, I started the set. And I recount in the book my exact splits. I still remember that set. And at the end of the set, Stu jumped in the water. And he, with his, he goes, you did it. And I'm thinking, you're an idiot. Your glasses are floating at the bottom of the pool. I still hate you. But I had accomplished. And what he did in that was he really motivated the rest of the team to believe that they too can accomplish. Yeah. He knew I could accomplish it. I didn't. I had the negative thoughts. He pushed me up that hill.
Wow.
And so, it's important right now to realize that some of our negative thoughts we can't deal with on our own. We're going to need our coaches or our parents or our families or, our mentors out there to help us overcome those negative thoughts. Other negative thoughts, like, for example, a couple of days ago, I went out for a run and I have a torn hamstring, and I thought, oh, I wish I could run 5 miles. I've only done 3.5. And I'm not sure I can do 5 miles. And then at 3.5 miles, I kept going. So I overcame that negative thought and got to the 5 mile mark. And 6 months ago, I never would have believed that I could even run outside, let alone run 5 miles. So these negative thoughts have a reason. They push you to get forward.
Yeah.
Can you think of any examples?
Well, it's interesting, this morning, when you get up and you go through a bit of a routine and then I, check my phone, and one of the things, you get some of these pop-ups that show up, and I think it's Goalcast is one of the things. And it was just a story about Eminem. And the only reason I'm any clued into Eminem, my son, when he was a youngster, loved Eminem, and it was a bit sordid in a sense for his youthful age. But learning the story about him, and I knew there were some stories about it, but the challenges that he had in the beginning, and then his stick-to-itiveness, his ability to overcome those, we'll call them thoughts or negative thoughts, or the people that put negative thoughts there. He just kept overcoming them, and led to some open doors or opportunities. So he made those things happen. So that's when I look at this schematic, this illustration, I think of what I saw earlier this morning.
Right, right. And, I mean, I was watching the Michael Jordan movie last night, or Netflix series, and I think about, Michael Phelps, who overcame 80. I mean, we all overcome stuff.
Yep.
So
Yep.
this is a great visual to put on your desk right now, that you too can overcome. You can push up those, that boulder uphill, despite all the things that are happening.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just take this moment. I've mentioned it a couple times during some other webinars we've been having with coaches and administrators, talking about the process of returning back to play or back to sport. And we know that there's an anxiousness and everything, but I used the example back in 1983, and you probably recall this, Victor Davis, who we're all hold dear in our heart. In 1983, he contracted mononucleosis, and
Right.
he didn't compete at the Pan Am Games. And so within less than a year, so I think about 9 months, the Olympic Games were going to take place in '84, and he had to take time off. He had to slowly return. And I remember I swam with Victor, and his return to the pool was quite extraordinary. When I say extraordinary, he was last in the lane with the 10-year-olds. And he just sort of each day worked through it, frustrating and everything else. Well, that next year, after 9 months, he went on to set a few world records and win a gold medal at the Olympics. So my point from that really is that it may be that big boulder or maybe those barriers in your way, but you don't need to rush it. You need to just be on it, on task, and don't give up the go.
Such a great story. And, I mean, Victor, I don't know whether you know this, Victor died the day our first child was born.
You had mentioned this long. Yes.
And so, like, I honestly, every time I think about him, I get goosebumps. Like, I think there's a connection there, and I knew him very well. So
yeah. You were on the '84 Olympic team with him.
Yeah. So I think that,
pretty special moment in Canadian swimming, and so if we can draw on these stories, that's what helps us.
Right. And that's the important thing, is that the stories we create in our mind can either be negative or we can find positive things in them.
Yeah.
And that's what we're attempting to do, is to help you understand that, you are going to have negative stories. It's natural in the human condition to have negative thoughts. It's what you do with those thoughts. First, you need awareness, which is actually. Yes. So this is a theory, and again, it's something that I've been working on. This is the first time I've actually put it out in a diagram. I would say take this, it's probably going to trigger people, but I also want you to take it and start thinking about it, because I think there's a lot, this is stuff that came out of my book. Okay. And so as athletes, our thoughts have been framed by our socialization. And in that socialization, we have grown up with a comparative analysis. So we're constantly compared to someone. You're in this lane, you're in that lane. You're faster, you're slower. You're a better coach, you get named to the national team. You have potential, you get to go here. And it's throughout sports. It's not necessarily a negative. It's an awareness that we need, that we have grown up being compared to people.
Yes.
And consequently, we compare ourselves to other people. So swimmers in BC might get in the pool faster than swimmers in Ontario, because swimmers in Ontario, there's more cases in Ontario. And so, you're constantly going to be making that comparison relative to yourself.
Yeah.
As well as other people making that comparison on you. We've also learned and grown up with judgment, and why this judgment is part of life. And there's lots of positive things. We grow out of judgment. It also can be very negative. And when judgment goes to judgmental thoughts about how you feel about yourself, or also judgmental comments towards you, that's when it really can become a negative. And so we have to be aware that we judge ourselves, and others are constantly judging us in relationship to the comparative analysis.
Yeah.
And then finally, to move from, to get out of judgment and back into the good books, we attempt to gain approval and look for recognition. And so as a swimmer, and I'm talking about my own experience, but this was pretty evident throughout all of the 100 people I interviewed, that there was a struggle because they have comparison, they're constantly judged, they compare themselves, so that's from the outside, they compare themselves to others, and others are constantly judging them. And so to gain the good favor again, you perform and do things for approval and recognition.
Yeah.
So this influences our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes not in a good way.
No. It's how we have to manage ourselves. We have to
manage ourselves.
And sometimes we need help. We need to help ourselves, and sometimes we need to ask for help.
Right. So, and in transition, this is a big deal, but that's another topic.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'd like to do today is give you a couple of tools to help take control of these thoughts. Okay?
Okay.
As we know, you're going to get sick of this and the brain thoughts, but as we know, if you're not aware, you can't deal with it.
Yes.
So you have to sit back and start pondering some of these questions.
Yeah. I'm actually going to cut this one out and put it in my little work cubby here at home and just remind myself and sit back and just, as you say, ponder and reflect and just really be aware of what's going on inside and inside myself, but also what's going on the outside as well.
Right. And I recommend you sitting back and looking at this and saying, I wonder how that really has influenced my life. Because, if you look at how child development, again, not a psychologist, but exposure to environments affect us.
Yes.
We know that. So, okay. So I have put out 2 different ways to deal with this. This first way, performance equals potential minus interference, was originated by Tim Galway, who wrote The Inner Game of Tennis and then went on to write The Inner Game of Golf and The Inner Game of Business. And it is a fantastic formula because your potential minus the interference that gets in the way of that potential will affect how you perform. And there's obviously physical interference and mental interference. And thoughts are part of that mental interference.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I call it the itty bitty shitty committee.
Yes, I love that. I think it is so good, and I think if it can trigger someone to think in a more responsive, positive way, that's what it takes. It takes that type of reminder. So
version 1 of that committee is that persistent negative voice that's constant, that's irrational, that questions our ability, chastises our mistakes, downplays our accomplishments, keeps you in your comfort zone, will show up under stress, and makes it hard to move forward, and says, back to that saber-toothed tiger, you should be afraid. Whereas version 2 is, I can do this. I'm choosing to look on the side of positivity. I'm going to look at this logically. I am learning from this. I accomplished that. I like to learn. I want to be challenged. I want to try it. I can handle this. This is exciting. And any other variation of this that you want.
Sure. But I think we know what version we want to be and we strive to be. Yeah.
And so, this again is one of those little things that you can laminate and put in your
Yeah.
coaching book, and remind yourself that, every way as a coach, every time you interact with an athlete,
Hmm.
they could be in version 1, and it's your
Yeah.
job to switch them to version 2.
Absolutely.
And if we
That's
start
great.
working on switching them to version 2, then we can get rid of some of those negative impacts
Yeah.
of the comparative and the judgment and the need for approval and recognition.
Exactly. This is perfect.
Yeah. So that's one way to look at it.
Hmm.
And then the second way, there's several ways, but I thought these would be the 2 best ways. These are my 2 favorite ways. Is called switching questions. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I did this amazing course with Marilee Adams, who wrote a book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it's a book I would recommend all our coaches read, because it really gets out of the telling. It's a story, so it's a very easy read. And so I went on this course for a week with her. It's called Question Thinking. And part of the course was about learning how to facilitate question thinking. Her major thesis is we jump to answers too fast. And because we jump to answers, we don't ask the right questions. So, when we're brainstorming, we really should be Q storming, question storming.
Mm-hmm.
What are the questions we're missing? And an example she gives is, after World War I, the questions that were being asked are, how can we punish Germany? If we had thought, instead of another question, how can we bring Germany into the fold, maybe we wouldn't have had World War II. And so diving into, the questions versus jumping to answers is a way to interrupt thoughts. And this is, she has 5 or 6 go-to questions. I've gone through and added to her original list all of these plus more that I think are relevant for our athletes. So, while I'm not going to read these out, it's going to be in your download folder. But, I have my top 5, and my recommendation is that each individual pick 5 to 8. Don't go more than 8, because you won't follow through on it. And when you start to hit a negative thought, pull those 8 out and think, what question can I ask myself? Because in the moment when you ask yourself that question, you interrupt that negative thought and start thinking of a solution. And so the idea is that we want to interrupt our thoughts and our natural tendency to go to answers, and start thinking about what are the questions we need to ask.
Yep.
Yep.
Well,
So,
it goes back to your point. I think it was last week or whatever, learning about taking a pause and have a different viewpoint, or how you look at things, or evaluate it. Right. So.
And that's my favorite. That is my favorite absolute question. I ask myself all the time, what's another way to look at this? Because, perspective is really important, but we can get caught up in our own stories and our own perspective. So if you think about how to look at it from another angle, it's called, I think it's called inverse the logic in business. That if you inverse the logic to why you would make a decision, and think, well, why wouldn't, what would be another way to think about this in terms of why would someone make a different decision? Then you start to bring other thoughts into your head.
Yeah. Well, when I saw this earlier, I went through the process and just sort of put a few things down, what I think I'm hoping that I work on, but what are the facts came to mind right away, and what is the effect I'm having on others, and how can I bring a positive energy to the situation, and how can I keep working, or how can I work at maintaining momentum? Those were important pieces. Am I being the kind of leader that I want to be? Those are always the the
Right.
questions that, about it. And lastly, how I can be, or what can I do to have a better impact?
Right.
And I think I really actually, this was a good day starter again for me,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I love this. I mean, I think this is this particular sheet, plus the one before, but this is my
Yep.
go-to when I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I go to this. And I think about, I was working with a athlete yesterday, and this particular individual was talking about how other individuals started when they were 5, and he didn't start until he was 13. And so obviously they had way more confidence in their skill set than he did. And I went to him, well, what assumptions are you making there?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of went, whoa. And I said, like, why would you assume that, starting when you're 5 gives you more confidence? Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Sure.
And so I interrupted a thought process that he was, putting himself down because he started later, when in fact, some research says that, it's better to do multi-sports and then gets very specific in the sport that you want to really excel in. So, I mean, it's a great tool to think back on and to talk to your swimmers about.
Yeah. And I think this is going to be a valuable tool as we started off talking about, as we work towards this return to play or return to sport, and how things will, as we're learning. I think the good thing is that as I, follow a little bit of what's going on in the news and the approaches that are being taken, one of caution, but also optimism, and that things are going to go at different rates, different stages, and we have to be prepared for that, and we have to adapt and to adjust. And I think when you have these little tools that can help calm, we'll call it calm the waters a little bit, or calm your emotional state.
Right. No, I agree.
I think this has been really good, Melinda, as always. But I think each step of the way, as we work towards these uncharted waters that we're in, these are absolutely really helpful tools that we just take a little bit of time, we work through them, and develop them, and create and fill up our own toolbox. I think that's going to help us now, but I think it's going to help down the road. I really do believe that, and really appreciate you taking the time with us. And we look forward to the next session.
Yeah, my pleasure. And just one note of caution: like, these things don't come naturally to us because we're programmed to do things, and so pausing and thinking about things is hard sometimes, and pausing and interrupting our negative thoughts is really hard. So be kind to yourself as you're doing this. Pick a time, 5 minutes a day, and ask yourself a couple of these questions. That's all you need to start with, because that'll get your mind thinking differently. I promise you that. So
I think you're absolutely right, and really appreciate this. And I look at this as my day starter. My day might get started a little bit later as I go through some of these exercises, but when you put it in context of 5 minutes, that's nothing for what it can do for the next 24 hours.
Totally. Good. Okay. Great to see everybody.
Well,
Hope you're well.
Melinda. Till the next time.
Yep. Anybody have questions, you can reach out.